We are here today with Ruth Frank, who is the best decision that past district governor, the late William Frank, ever made. Bill served as our district governor in District 5260, 1973-74. And everything, all of his success as district governor was, of course, because of you, Ruth. You have some amazing stories to tell us on the subject of Rotary's efforts to eradicate polio, which we're so far along now, but you were there right at the beginning of this. What was Bill's first involvement, working with you, of course? What was his first involvement in the idea of connecting Rotary and polio eradication? How did that come to you?
Well, what happened was I did have polio at the end of 1950, and I was in the hospital for 2 years, and that was like average for that time. We were very concerned because so many children and adults, young adults, were coming down with this horrible disease and were unable to walk and to be part of society. And every year, we belonged to Rotary. My husband loved Rotary because he loved making things better for the world. And every year, Rotary International has a big convention, and they honor the person for that year that they felt made the biggest difference for the better in the world. And in the year, I believe it was 1980, they held their convention Rotary held their convention in Kansas City, and the honoree was Dr. Albert Sabin of the Sabin vaccine. And we were all excited about seeing him, but he thanked everyone, and he said he was very honored, but he turned around and he challenged Rotary to eradicate it. He said, it's a horrible disease, but I don't know of any other group that can do it. But you can, because you're in all of the countries, all over the world, and you have people who want to make a better world. That's why they're here. And they can serve and help. And so he challenged them, and someone got up and said, Dr. Sabin, we accept your challenge. On the go. And at that time, they said if we could come up with about $120 million, we could make a big start. And so it was divided. My husband was asked to be a coordinator. I think, you can look it up, but I think there were about 15 in the world. And he had a coordinator for the United States. They called it UCB, United States, Canada, and Bermuda. That was where he began. And we started, they had golf tournaments, they had a lot of different things going, and so we decided we're going to have another meeting, and at the next convention, each country was called upon to tell us how much money they accumulated. And we did. We got the 120, that was just before they got to the last, when we went alphabetical, and the United States was the last one, and put it way over the top, because we had raised 120 million ourselves, just Rotary. So time to get started. So when they divided it and into different groups, my husband was in charge, he was coordinator for United States, Canada, and Bermuda to start with. And it took us, we were invited to the United Nations, and they were very serious about it. And there were people, Rotarians there from Japan, and they drew a picture on a board there of a child with one eye, and they said, we promise. And the other eye will be put on when we've kept our promise. And that means every child will be protected from this terrible disease of polio. And we were there when they painted that eye on, and we were there when the other eye was. That was when they had a big party at the UN, and we were there, and our speaker was Audrey Hepburn. Just before she passed away, she had no notes. She spoke from the heart at the UN. It was the most beautiful talk of what Rotary had done and what we've done. And it was a proclamation that 90% of all the children in the world had been prevented from getting this terrible disease. So Rotary really went to work with so many projects to raise the funds, but they did it. And even we went to, like Japan, you know, they gave us several $1 million. Different countries gave us millions of dollars that they raised. And it was so exciting when we went to Kansas City, when the balloons came down. When we got the 120 million, then balloons came down, and people were hugging each other and screaming. They couldn't have been happier, no matter what in the world had happened. I mean, but we did it, and then we had little signs to put on. We kept our promise. I think that was just, it was just more than we could stand emotionally. But
and that was how it kicked off,
yeah.
and has continued to grow to the worldwide effort. What were there specific efforts made that you and Bill were part of in terms of actually implementing the immunizations, the vaccinations? Were you part of the process early on of sending teams into countries the way they've done now with what are called National Immunization Days?
Yes.
What were the beginnings that you recall of the actual process of getting to the children of the world to give them the vaccine?
Yeah. Well, of course, Rotary's in so many countries, and they were very excited about it and about what we were doing, and so they had it ready. The problem was that in some countries, they didn't always, in parts we were going, had electricity, and our vaccine had to be kept at a certain temperature. So we had to send refrigerators, and refrigerators that could go sometimes, at least keep cold, without being plugged in. And but it worked. We knew what problems we were going to find ahead in certain countries, and we tried to solve them before we went there, knowing what it was. But it was so worthwhile, I can say. We could all congratulate everyone in the Rotary. So many took part. And of course we did get a lot of help from Bill Gates. You could look it up, but it went to almost $1 million that he eventually came through, because first he gave us some millions, and then he said, "Oh, let's get it over with, because the more money we have, the quicker we can get through with this." And so he did give us a lot of money, and that was such a big help. But he looked it up, and he knew, because he doesn't give that kind of money to everyone. He wanted to be sure that it was going to the right people, and it was going to make that big difference in the world that it did. It changed the world.
And one of the things you point out is what we often forget is that the cost involved is not just the cost of creating the vaccine. No. It's being able to get it safely to the locations where it's needed. And that's always the challenge, which I think what it sounds like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation recognized, that because Rotarians have people on the ground in the communities, that's how we could get into the communities. Right.
Now, Dr. Salks, his medication was perfect for the United States and all, but it was a shot. And the Rotarians couldn't do that unless they were nurses or doctors. And not only that, you need syringes and things. With Dr. Sabin's, we didn't need anything extra. We just put the drops right on the tongue, and we didn't need any other equipment. So that made it less expensive, but not only that, the children were happier.
Not too many children enjoy getting shots.
No, I do have a very funny story to tell about that.
Good. I want to hear it, please.
We were at the United Nations, And the occasion was we now have 90% of all the children in the world protected from polio. And Rotary did have a big part. So we had a lot of interesting people there. And one was President Carter and his wife were sitting there. And there was a little boy from Harlem, about 4 years old, who had never had the protection. And so they brought him there, and they let he could sit on President Carter's lap, and President Carter was going to put the vaccination on a tongue. He was going to put the
give him the two drops.
The drops. He put the drops on the tongue, and the little boy sat there, and he was so happy, and then he bounced off of it. But our project with Rotary was polio plus. It wasn't just polio, and the plus was going to be taken care of by the UN, and that meant it was whooping cough and all kinds of all those diseases that the children got. And so that unfortunately had to be a shot. Now this child did not know that, and he was happy because he had the Sabin vaccine, and it was great. And he's dancing around, and all of a sudden he's called upon by one of the ladies who gives the shot. But she's going to do the plus part, but he did not know that. And of course, as I said, it was from whooping cough, different malaria even was in there. But anyway, he had to have the shot, and he was just so happy, dancing. So she called him over and sat the little boy on her lap, and bingo, she gave him the shot. And all the cameras were on him. There was the BBC, and from Belgium, and from all over the world there. And he let out a whoop. And I was sitting next to the BBC people taking pictures. And I said, I guess that's the shot that's being heard around the world. And she said, can I use that line in my talk? Because it was. And it was really funny.
Yeah. You wonder where that little boy is today, all these years later.
Oh.
And does he have a fear of needles or a fear of large crowds?
Yeah.
But he doesn't have any of those diseases, so at least that's a good thing.
That's right.
You know, we should have suggested something to them. First give them the shot, then give him the reward of the
The
two
reward.
drops.
That's right.
Might make sense. Now,
right.
Which of these events did you meet the doctor? You had mentioned to us before we started.
Dr. Albert Sabin?
Where was that?
It was actually at a dinner at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem had, honoring Frank Sinatra for what he had done for peace. And we sat with him for the evening, and it was remarkable. And one thing I do want known is that Dr. Sabin and Dr. Salk both refused to take out a patent on what they discovered, because if they did, of course they'd have to get the lawyers, and they would each get a considerable amount from the vaccine. They wanted that vaccine, and Dr. Sabin told us at the time, we want that to be so inexpensive that there wouldn't be a child in the world that couldn't have it because of the money. And so I checked now, and that vaccine costs 6 cents a dose. So I think, and they would have been so wealthy. They didn't want it. No patent, no one involved. They did something, it worked, it solved our problem, and I think that they're heroes. I think we should have statues to them, because they made life so much easier. The children could have parties. You know, my husband was raised in a very small town in New Mexico called Silver City, and he was in the Boy Scouts, and all the boys were, because there wasn't a lot to do there. They do have a nice university there. But he was chosen as a Boy Scout to represent them at the Boy Scout Jamboree. And that was a big honor. And that year, it was going to be in Washington, D.C. And he was so thrilled. I mean, he came from this little town. He had never seen the really wonderful cities. And so he just couldn't wait till the day. Well, what happened was they canceled the whole jamboree. This was international because of polio. Mothers were not going to send their children, and it came right out with it. It is canceled because of the polio was so rampant that they had to cancel. Boy Scout Jamboree. They were coming from all over the world. But polio was from all over the world.
And they needed to be very careful not to extend it. Well, but you were describing that as a fact of life here.
Yes.
In the era. When did you... I mean, obviously this is something that made the issue of polio very important to Bill. What was your personal experience with polio?
It was the worst pain I'd ever had in my life. And I was just reading about President Roosevelt, who said the same thing. He said he'd never had pain like that. Excruciating when it started. And we didn't really know what it was. So they gave me morphine at the hospital. Nothing would help. And then, because my husband took me because the pain in my legs were just impossible to live with. And so finally the doctor, I was at the Good Samaritan Hospital that he took me to in Los Angeles, and it so happened that the chief of staff was Dr. Philip Cannan, and he had delivered me 20 some odd years before. And he came to see me. He heard that I had this problem, that the pain, and he tested my legs, and he had a great suspicion that it was polio, and so he ordered the spinal tap. And the spinal tap is the only way that they really know for sure if it's polio. So they took the spine from my spine, put it under a magnifying glass, what they do, and they found the polio virus right away. And that's the only way that they ever knew for sure if it was polio. And so immediately they wanted me out of that hospital because they wanted me in a contagious disease place. And they felt that usually it's 7 days, and they said 7 days or until your temperature is completely normal. So when I saw what was going on at that place here in LA, it just, they had, it's hard to describe, but they had all of these, the children they were in the iron lungs, and they had a row of them, and so many children, and children crying and screaming, and people just waiting to get in. It was such a big epidemic, and they were coming in, and I was told that anything I bring in, I cannot take home, even a toothbrush or anything. It stays there because it was a contagious disease. And so they finally got a place for me in that huge, huge room. I can't even imagine how many people there were in this big room. And
you had 2 young children of your own at that time. How many adults were in that room? You're describing all the children.
Yes.
Were there also many adults now?
Yes, there were quite a few. And then the hospital where they sent me from there, it was at Huntington Memorial Hospital in Pasadena. There was also another hospital that just opened up for just polios on the other side of town, but they were completely filled up from away. So Huntington Memorial in Pasadena, they had at least 1 floor with nothing but, they were all adult polios. And my roommate, when I got there, was a young lady from UCLA. She was a student, and she contracted polio. And they had the bottom floor of the Huntington Memorial Hospital was all made up for polios. The physiotherapists and the warm pools, water pools, and it was exercise, everything was for polios at that time, because it was just all over. It was a terrible disease.
Forgive my impolite question.
Yeah.
What year was this when this was happening?
1950.
1950.
Yeah.
So it feels like a very long time ago, and yet it's so recent that this was happening right here where we live.
But it was happening all over the world. Yes, it was. A lot of it here. And a lot were students. I lost 3 of my closest friends. One had just graduated, Phi Beta Kappa, straight A at UCLA, and she died of polio, and fast of it. And it was taking a lot of lives. And now she must have been about 20.
So for you and Bill to have been such a part of the beginnings of the effort to knock it out forever.
Some of the husbands left. And my husband said right away, we're in this together, and we're going to do something about it. He said this, as he said, it's immoral. Children like this. And he said, we must fix it, and I want to be a part of it, whatever. And that's why his name was turned into the United Nations, because he let it be known, I want to get rid of this polio. And he did.
If we're doing this, he's going to be a part of making this happen.
And we, as I said, we were sweethearts, and we never wanted to be separated no matter what happened to either of us, and that's the way we always were.
We want to give you the chance to help us explain something to people. One of the key reasons we wanted to talk to you today. One of the things that our Rotary Club does is an annual event. Every club tries to do something to continue our Rotary efforts to eradicate polio.
Yeah.
So we do an annual event to raise money. It happens to be a dance coming up very soon from when you and I are talking today. The idea is that we are dancing for the children who can't dance because of polio, so that our efforts will make that never have to be true again. But when we talk to people here in our community and we say we're raising funds to eradicate polio, and it's amazing how often I have had the response, but wait a minute, there's no more polio. And the answer is, that's true. There's no more polio here in the United States, but it's in other places in the world still, and even in the countries where it is not still endemic, there are only 3 countries left. But there are still pockets elsewhere. And for example, you mentioned Israel. I have cousins in Israel. They recently had a flare-up there. They found the virus in sewage. There has not been an outbreak of polio, but as a precaution, they are going through a round of immunizations. And I found out that my young cousins in Israel just had the 2 drops again, just to be safe. So with your perspective as a polio survivor, with your perspective as one of the people working with past District Governor Bill to make the eradication of polio a reality, what would you tell me as an American who did not grow up in the epidemic of polio, and certainly people much, much younger than I am who don't understand? What do you tell me about why it's important to finish this?
Because it's important to finish our tour of eradicating polio and having every child in the world protected, is because it was such a frightening thing, and mothers with the children were trying to protect their children, so it really took all the fun out of our life. And I feel our mothers could feel relaxed. But remember, they didn't let their children go to movies or swim in the pool or go to the beach. I mean, or go to meetings, even the Boy Scouts. All of these things that make life so important and meaningful. And it was like the whole world shut down. It got so bad. And it's been going on for a long time. Polio can trace back. So and it hits children, so I think it's the greatest thing that Rotary could do is to eliminate this. And as Dr. Sabin said, he said, I don't know of another group that can do it. You can do it, Rotary. And they did it. And I think, and we have to continue now to see that it doesn't happen, flare up again, so we can enjoy life on this wonderful earth. And I feel it's just so important, and it eliminates the fear.
Well, Ruth Frank, partner with past District Governor, the late Bill Frank, in helping us start this effort so we can finish it. Thank you for your time today and for giving us these stories so we can set the context of why we're still doing what we do today. Thank you for all of your time.
Oh, it's been a dream of me to let people really know of what happened, and so we can continue to absolutely wipe polio off the map of any kind, and Rotary will do it. And I'm so thrilled to be here. You have no idea.
And so are we.
It's great.
Thank you for letting us do this.